For decades, this story was simmering in the shadows of extreme wealth and power. But now, with the unsealing of the Epstein files, the full, ugly reality of a systemic criminal enterprise has been dragged into the light. So in this explainer, we're going to go beyond the headlines to really understand the machinery of abuse these documents reveal.
Alright, so here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the architect himself, then expose the ecosystem of power that shielded him. We'll look at how justice was literally bought and sold, get into the recent reckoning of names, and finally we have to confront the devastating human cost of it all. You know, the source documents aren't just describing a series of crimes. They're painting a picture of something much more organized, what one source calls a sprawling, predatory apparatus. That phrase, it really captures the sheer scale of the system we're about to unpack. Okay, so to really get this system, you've got to start with the guy at the center of it all, Jeffrey Epstein. He meticulously crafted this image of being a brilliant, super wealthy financier. But that persona, it wasn't just for show. It was his most effective and devastating lure for both the powerful people he wanted in his orbit and the vulnerable people he wanted to prey on. Look, this wasn't random. Not at all. The files detail a calculated, self-fueling pipeline. With the help of associates like Ghislaine Maxwell, the operation would identify and then lure in vulnerable girls, promising them jobs or cash. The abuse often started under the guise of massages. From there, it was all about creating a cycle of dependence using money and psychological manipulation, eventually turning victims into recruiters themselves. It was horrifying. And it was a business model.
But here's the thing. Epstein couldn't have done this alone. The really chilling reality that these files expose is the massive, powerful ecosystem that allowed his abuse to go on for decades. This network, it was the machine that protected the man.
And right at the heart of this network, his private Boeing 727, which got that infamous nickname, the Lolita Express. When you look at its flight logs, it reads like a who's who of global elites. Politicians, scientists, CEOs, even royalty.
So, what was the point of this network? Well, it had a very clear function. Having all these powerful people around gave Epstein a veneer of legitimacy. It created this atmosphere where he felt completely untouchable. The files describe a world where underage girls were just around, on his properties, on his jet, which just begs the question, who saw what was happening and decided to look the other way? And to protect an operation like this, Epstein used his insane wealth to build a legal fortress. He had teams of lawyers and private investigators on the payroll, and they used everything, NDAs, settlements, straight-up intimidation to keep victims and witnesses quiet for years. And that brings us to what is, for a lot of people, the single most infuriating part of this whole story, the 2008 case in Florida. This is really the Rosetta Stone for understanding how Epstein got away with it all for so long.
Just look at this. The gap between what should have happened and what actually did happen, it's staggering. Federal investigators had built this solid case. We're talking serious sex trafficking charges, more than 30 identified victims, a case that should have meant life in prison. But instead, a secret sweetheart deal made all those federal charges just disappear. They were replaced with minor state charges, and this is crucial. The deal gave sweeping immunity not just to Epstein, but to his entire network of potential co-conspirators.
So what did he get? Just 13 months. And get this, he spent a lot of that time in a private wing of a county jail with work release privileges 6 days a week. This wasn't justice. This was justice being sold to the highest bidder. And because of this deal, the abuse was allowed to continue for another 10 years. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. Thanks to some incredibly brave journalism and the absolute refusal of his victims to be silenced, the case was forced back into the spotlight, leading to a new and very public reckoning. It's wild when you see it laid out like this. The path to any kind of justice was just so long. After that sweetheart deal in 2008, it took over a decade of relentless work by journalists and victims to force this thing back into the open. That led to his rearrest in 2019. After he died in custody and Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted, the final push came to get these civil case files unsealed, which finally happened in early 2024.
So when these files were finally unsealed, the media went into a frenzy over the list, right? The names. But the real story here, it isn't just about who was named. The much deeper question is, what do these thousands of pages actually tell us about our world?
The answer is that it's so much more than a list. Think of these files as a blueprint for how incredible wealth and influence can literally bend the law. They are a record of an institutionalized trafficking ring that was hiding in plain sight. And they've forced a really painful but necessary cultural reckoning.
And that brings us to the most important part of this whole thing. Because behind all the legal maneuvering, the private jets, the famous names, these files are a raw documentation of profound and lasting human trauma.
There's a quote in the source material that it says everything you need to know. The files are a ledger of stolen childhoods, shattered trust, and decades of psychological anguish. Every single deposition, every testimony, it's a story of survival. It's a record of the true cost of these crimes.
And the hard reality is, this story isn't over. Epstein is dead. His number one accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, is in prison. But the files make it crystal clear that their network of enablers was vast. And for most of them, real accountability just hasn't happened, leaving survivors to deal with a world that still hasn't fully reckoned with how this was allowed to happen.
So in the end, what are these files? They're a permanent, damning indictment of a system that failed its most vulnerable. And they force every single one of us to ask a really uncomfortable question. If justice can be bought by the rich and powerful, what's the true price the rest of us have to pay?